What if the smallest country in Southeast Asia was quietly becoming one of the most powerful economic forces on the entire planet? That question might sound dramatic. It might even sound impossible. Singapore is a city that could fit inside some of the world's major airports. It has no oil, no rivers, no farmland, and almost no natural resources to speak of. It imports even its own water. And yet, right now, today, Singapore is doing something that massive superpowers with armies and satellites can only dream about. It is buying the world. Not with tanks, not with threats, with money. Quiet, strategic, disciplined, and almost invisible money. Most people scroll past Singapore in a geography quiz and move on. They think of it as a clean city with strict laws and expensive food. But behind that polished skyline is a financial machine that has been running for decades, making investments so vast and so calculated that governments, corporations, and entire economies feel the weight of Singapore's decisions without even realizing who made them. Over the next few minutes, you are going to see Singapore in a completely new light. Stay with me, because this story is wild. Point 1. The birth of a financial superpower nobody expected. To understand how Singapore became what it is today, you have to go back to 1965. That was the year Singapore was literally expelled from Malaysia, kicked out, told to figure it out on its own. No resources, no hinterland, no real military. Just a tiny island of about 1.5 million people sitting at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. The man who took the reins was Kuan Yew, and instead of panicking, he looked at what Singapore actually had. It had a port, a remarkable port, right at one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. It had a population that was educated and hungry to succeed. And it had a government willing to make hard, unpopular, long-term decisions. Kuan Yew and his team made a choice that changed everything. They would not rely on aid. They would not borrow recklessly. They would build a system that turned every dollar earned into more dollars. They would save aggressively, invest wisely, and become indispensable to the global economy. Within a single generation, Singapore. Point 2. The Central Provident Fund, the engine nobody talks about. Now here is where it gets interesting. One of the main reasons Singapore has so much money to invest globally is something called the Central Provident Fund, or CPF. And if you have never heard of it, that is about to change. The CPF is a mandatory savings system. Every working Singaporean contributes a portion of their income into this fund. Employers add on top of that. When you are young and working in Singapore, a significant chunk of your paycheck goes straight into CPF accounts. By the time most Singaporeans reach retirement, they have accumulated serious amounts of savings. Now here is the key. The government does not just let that money sit there. It channels those funds into investment vehicles, particularly into a government investment arm called GIC, which we will talk about more in a moment. This creates a massive pool of patient capital, money that does not need quick returns, money that can wait 10 years, 20 years, or longer to pay off. That kind of patient capital is incredibly rare in the world of finance. Most investors are chasing quarterly returns. Singapore is playing a game that spans generations, and that is exactly why it keeps winning. Point 3. GIC, the $2 trillion ghost. If you want to understand Singapore's global reach, you need to know about GIC, the Government of Singapore Investment Corporation. On the surface, it sounds boring. In reality, it is one of the largest and most secretive sovereign wealth funds on the planet. GIC manages what is estimated to be well over $700 billion in assets. Some analysts believe the real number is significantly higher when you account for everything under its umbrella. It invests in stocks, bonds, real estate, private equity, and infrastructure across more than 40 countries. And it does all of this with almost zero noise. GIC does not tweet. It does not hold press conferences. It does not announce its moves ahead of time. It operates with a level of discretion that even the most secretive hedge funds would envy. When GIC buys a stake in a European bank, or takes a position in an American tech company, or finances a logistics hub in India, most people never connect those dots back to Singapore. That invisibility is not an accident. It is a strategy. Stay quiet, stay patient, stay profitable. GIC has Point 4. Temasek, the investment giant with a public face. GIC is the quiet one, but Singapore has another investment giant, and this one has a little more of a public profile. It is called Temasek Holdings, and Temasek is extraordinary in its own right. Temasek was founded in 1974 and is wholly owned by the Singapore government. It manages a portfolio valued at well over $300 billion. Unlike GIC, Temasek is slightly more transparent. It publishes annual reports and is willing to talk about some of its moves. But do not let that relative openness fool you. Temasek is still one of the most powerful investment entities on Earth. Temasek holds significant stakes in companies like Singapore Airlines, DBS Bank, Singapore Telecommunications, and Mapletree, one of Asia's largest real estate companies. But it also reaches far beyond Singapore. It has invested in Alibaba, Airtel, Ola, Bayer, Blackstone, and dozens of other global giants. It has poured money into fintech startups, biotech firms, and green energy companies across 6 continents. The goal is not just to earn returns today. It is to position Singapore in the industries that will define tomorrow. Artificial intelligence, clean energy, digital finance. Temasek is already there, planting flags before most countries even know the race has started. Point 5. Real estate. Singapore owns more of your city than you think. Here is something that will genuinely surprise you. Singapore is one of the biggest property owners in the world. Through various entities connected to Temasek and GIC, Singapore has been buying prime real estate in major global cities for decades. Think about London. Some of the most valuable commercial properties in the heart of the British capital are owned, either fully or partially, by Singaporean entities. The same is true in New York, Sydney, Tokyo, Paris, and Mumbai. Mapletree, which is linked to Temasek, owns office parks, logistics warehouses, data centers, and student housing across multiple countries. CapitaLand, another Singapore-linked giant, is one of Asia's largest real estate companies. It operates malls, serviced apartments, business parks, and mixed-use developments across over 30 countries. When you walk into a shopping mall in China or check into a serviced apartment in Germany, there is a real chance you're standing inside a Singapore-owned building. The reach is extraordinary. And because real estate is a quiet, stable asset class, these investments rarely make headlines. Property does not trend on social media, but it generates steady income and builds long-term wealth, year after year, decade after decade. Point 6. Singapore's grip on global trade and logistics. Singapore's port is not just big, it is the second busiest port in the world by cargo tonnage. Hundreds of thousands of ships pass through the Strait of Malacca every single year, and Singapore sits right at the choke point. About a third of all global seaborne trade passes through those waters. Singapore has turned that geographic gift into a strategic empire. The Port of Singapore is one of the most efficient, technologically advanced ports anywhere on Earth. It connects to over 600 ports in more than 120 countries. When manufacturers in China want to ship to Europe, Singapore is often part of the route. When oil moves from the Middle East to Asia, it passes Singapore's waters. This is not just about ships. It is about control. Whoever controls the flow of goods controls enormous leverage over global commerce. Beyond the port itself, Singapore has invested in logistics infrastructure around the world through companies like PSA International, a port operator that now runs terminals in more than 50 ports across multiple continents. Singapore is not just a transit point, it is a stakeholder in the arteries of global trade. Every container that moves through a PSA terminal generates revenue that feeds back into Singapore's wealth machine. Singapore's influence on global finance. Singapore is now the fourth largest foreign exchange trading center in the world. After London, New York, and Tokyo, more currency is traded in Singapore than anywhere else on the planet. That alone tells you something profound about the city's place in global finance. The Singapore Exchange, known as SGX, lists companies from across Asia and beyond. It is a key gateway for international investors wanting exposure to Asian markets. Thousands of global banks, hedge funds, and asset managers have set up operations in Singapore, not just because of its location, but because of its extraordinary regulatory environment, low taxes, and political stability. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is both the central bank and the financial regulator, is widely regarded as one of the most competent financial authorities in the world. It is strict enough to keep the system clean and safe, but flexible enough to attract innovation. Singapore was one of the first countries to create a regulatory sandbox for fintech companies. That forward-thinking approach has turned Singapore into Asia's de facto financial capital, rivaling and in some areas surpassing Hong Kong. And when you are the hub through which trillions of dollars flow, you accumulate power, relationships, and influence that money alone cannot buy. Point 8. The talent strategy, buying human capital. Here is something that most people miss when they talk about Singapore's success. Singapore does not just buy companies and real estate, it buys talent, strategically, aggressively, and with extraordinary results. Singapore has some of the most attractive immigration policies in the world for high-skilled professionals. It offers fast-tracked permanent residency for scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, and investors. It has built world-class universities and research institutions. It offers scholarships to brilliant students from across Asia and beyond, many of whom eventually stay and contribute to Singapore's economy. This is a form of investment that is rarely counted in financial portfolios, but it pays enormous dividends. When Singapore attracts a brilliant semiconductor engineer from India or a cutting-edge AI researcher from Europe, that person's work generates economic value, patents, and innovation that flows back into Singapore's growth. The country has positioned itself as the place where Asia's elite want to build their careers and companies. And in doing so, it has created a self-reinforcing cycle. Talented people attract more talented people, great companies attract better companies, wealth generates more wealth. Singapore has been running this cycle for 60 years, and it is nowhere near stopping. Point 9. Strategic investments in the future, AI, biotech, and green energy. Singapore is not just buying the world of today, it is buying the world of tomorrow. And the investments being made right now in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and green energy are going to shape the next 50 years of human civilization. Through GIC and Temasek, Singapore has poured billions into AI startups, cloud infrastructure companies, and semiconductor firms. Singapore itself is home to major research and development centers for companies like Google, Meta, Amazon, and dozens of biotech giants. The government has allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to its own national AI strategy, aiming to make Singapore a global leader in AI application across sectors like healthcare, logistics, and finance.
In biotech, Singapore has built a cluster called Biopolis that houses more than 50 research institutes and is home to thousands of scientists working on everything from cancer treatments to synthetic biology. In green energy, Temasek has launched initiatives to invest in solar, hydrogen, and carbon capture technologies, knowing that the energy transition represents one of the greatest wealth creation opportunities in human history. Singapore is not waiting to see who wins these races. It is investing in all the frontrunners. That is not luck. That is genius.
Point 10. Why nobody is stopping Singapore. So here's the question that might be forming in your mind. If Singapore is this powerful, if it is buying stakes in so many countries and industries, why is nobody trying to stop it? The answer is brilliant and a little bit uncomfortable. Singapore has made itself useful to everyone. It does not pick political sides. It trades with the United States and with China. It hosts American military ships and maintains warm relationships with Beijing. It is a member of ASEAN, but does not dominate it. It is a global financial hub that every major economy needs access to. Stopping Singapore would mean cutting off a piece of the global financial system that everyone depends on. There is also something deeper going on. Singapore invests in ways that benefit host countries. When GIC buys stakes in American infrastructure or European companies, it is bringing capital, not extracting it. When Temasek invests in an Indian startup, it is helping that company grow. Singapore has positioned its investments as partnerships, not takeovers. It wins by making others win too. And that is the most sophisticated and durable kind of power there is. Empires that conquer eventually face resistance. Partners that enrich each other keep growing forever.
If you walked into this video thinking Singapore was just a tidy little island city with great food and strict chewing gum laws, I hope you are walking out with a very different picture. This is a nation that turned rejection into resilience, and resilience into dominance. A country with no land, no oil, and no rivers that built one of the most sophisticated wealth machines the modern world has ever seen. It saved when others spent. It invested when others hesitated. It stayed patient when the whole world was chasing quick wins. Singapore is proof that size does not determine power. Strategy does. Vision does. Discipline does. And the quiet, relentless decision to play a long game while everyone else is distracted by the short one. The most powerful forces in our world are often the ones you never see coming. Singapore is not coming. It is already here. It is already in your banks, your buildings, your supply chains, and your future. And it has been for longer than most of us realized. If this video opened your eyes the way it opened mine when I first went deep on this topic, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me which point hit you the hardest. Was it the port, the sovereign wealth funds, or something else entirely? And if you want more content like this about the hidden forces shaping our world, then hit that like button and subscribe right now. Every